What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Move Better Mondays, filmed on Sundays, and today we are going to get this thing kicked off by talking about the second part of improving your knee stability and getting rid of knee pain. Last week we spoke about how to formulate two of the main areas that are going to cause a lot of that knee pain, which is right here in the front and then up here at the hip. So if you remember, the TFL and the VMO, so the quad muscle on the inside and that hip muscle right here on the outside. Now, once we've done rolling these two out, what we want to do is we want to stretch out some of the muscles that are going to affect that posture and that are going to allow us to contract the muscles that we need firing the entire time we're working out, we're running, we're jogging, we're doing activity, or just basically around the house for doing some housework or whatever. The muscles that we're going to be stretching out today are going to be the muscles that are really contributing to the majority of the issues that are going on in your body because they're affecting your posture and not allowing certain muscles to fire. Now, stretching over the last little while has been a controversial discussion. It's been a controversial topic. A lot of individuals suggesting that stretching, basically static stretching, which is essentially just holding a stretch for a very long time, is not exactly as beneficial as we always thought it was. Now, I think there's a bit of truth and a bit of fallacy, I'm gonna use fallacy, to that kind of statement. And the reason for that is simply because the amount of stretching you're gonna do is gonna be directly proportionate to the requirement of stretching that's needed for that specific muscle. So what I mean by that is, if you need to stretch the muscle, stretch it. If you don't need to stretch it, don't stretch it. So what I mean by that is, you may, let's say, be trying to stretch out your quads when your quads are actually trying to pull you forward and they're trying to put you in the right position, but you may be kind of going against it by stretching them out and not letting them do what they want to be doing to put you in that right position. So we have to be very selective with those muscles that we're going to be stretching. And today I want to talk about a couple of those areas that I think are really important. But before that, I want to show you exactly what muscles we're going to be talking about and kind of show you a bit of the anatomy that's going to go along to all this so you can really start understanding what's really happening at the body. So 1 second, I'll be right back. You guys can't see this? Okay, so basically when we look at the skeleton, so this is your spine coming down, your hips, this is the front, this is the back. So anatomy biomechanics lesson here. Essentially what's happening is when we're trying to get the right muscles to fire, we're trying to take this area here, the hip, and put it in the best position possible for the other muscles that we need to fire to be functioning properly. If they're not in the right position, they're not gonna fire. That's just how it is. There's no real way around it. So to make sure that this is all in the right place, we need to consider what muscles are probably going to be tossed out of place throughout some of the stuff we're going to be doing throughout our day. So sitting down a lot, maybe standing up too long, getting a little bit lazy with our posture, not really being placed properly on our foot so we're not balanced properly on our foot, hip shifting from side to side, something like that, staying on one leg more than the other. All these things are actually going to contribute to a potential disruption in this, what we like to call a neutral spine position. So basically keeping this spine in a neutral position, keeping this hip in a nice neutral position, and making sure that our body's in the best position to function. So the muscle that I really want to talk about first is the hip flexor. So the hip flexor is basically a group of muscles that are going to start up here, attach in the back, they're going to wrap around, they're actually attaching on the side here. They wrap underneath, so they go underneath basically all your organs, so your stomach and all that, and they come wrap underneath and then they drop back down and into your legs. So they do kind of like an S position there. And so what's happening with that is that when you actually go to lift your leg, what it's trying to do is it's actually trying to push your body forward. So what's happening is your spine's moving this way when your legs are trying to rise, and your core is actually preventing that spine from dumping forward and then tilting the hips forward. Jesus, that was terrible. Dumping the hips forward like this and actually causing all those muscles that are in the hip to not function. That's generally what's gonna happen for a lot of individuals, especially when we start getting lazy throughout our day or we're sitting down too long. That muscle group, that hip flexor muscle group gets really tight, our core shuts off, and then we end up in this position for a very long period of time. Now, what that position looks like when you're standing up is essentially, let me get the camera view, is essentially this, dumped back, rounded back here, and then tightened up in the front. So it's hard to really see exactly what that looks like if I just kind of stand up there and did that. But if you pay attention to it enough, you'll actually start noticing that a lot of that comes to a compressed spine. So this spine gets compressed here in the back as all of these bones start slapping up into each other. And what we want to do is we actually want to bring ourselves back into this nice position. One of the ways to do that is by stretching out that hip flexor group. So I'm going to show you guys exactly what that looks like right now. So the other thing I wanted to mention was that there's also a quad muscle that is a hip flexor. Now this muscle acts as two things. It's going to extend the knee and it's going to pull your hip up. So because of that, we need to stretch out the quad muscles as well as that hip flexor group to make sure that we're releasing as much of the front as possible so that we can actually gain some control later in our third step through contracting that core and keeping it nice and solid, and therefore lining us up and allowing us to kind of sit in that right position, get those other muscles to fire. So let's jump right into that stretch. Now, basically all you're gonna really need to do is put your back leg up on a bench, sit back into it. Notice how I close up that angle and that space as much as I possibly can. I'm resting my knee on the ground. You can put a pad on their knee if it's bugging you. I know some individuals, if they sit, sometimes if you can't get that distance and you're sitting all the way out here, you tend to put a lot of pressure right on the top of that kneecap, and that kind of becomes a little bit of an issue. So if you can't handle just sitting there like this, throw a pad on there, you'll be just fine. And then from here, what we want to do is we actually want to actively contract this butt muscle, not the one on the right. For me, the one on the left. Now, doing this is going to allow this muscle and this muscle group in this area to completely relax the way we want it to. So contract your core, squeeze the butt. That's gonna allow us to sit into this stretch a bit better. And then what we can do is we just shift forward, and that's gonna allow us to stretch both the quad and the main hip flexor group here. We need to make sure that that spine is neutral. So we need to make sure that we keep the core contracted, so that this doesn't turn into this and we basically aren't stretching anything. We need that spine, we need that nice spine, so pack it in nice, get the core firing, and then sit here and you're basically just stretching out that muscle group. Again, 30 seconds to a minute, and that's really all you're gonna need for this type of stretch. Now the next stretch we're gonna be doing is for that TFL group, which is right up here. Now there's two ways to stretch it. I don't really mind which one you use. I'm pretty much split between the two. Some of my clients use one, some of my clients use the other. I don't really have a preference. They're both pretty good and they both basically get the job done. So let's take a look at that right now. So now we're gonna talk about that TFL stretch and that muscle that's pretty much up here at the top of the hip and how to stretch that out. Now there's two ways of doing it, as I mentioned. The first way, we could start on the ground. It's pretty easy. I like this one a little bit better than the other one simply because it's you relaxed on the ground. You don't have to worry about balance, you don't have to worry about anything else. It's much easier to do. And if you have enough mobility just in your hip itself, it's a pretty easy position to get into. So let's take a quick look at that right now. Now, all we're gonna do is essentially just line our back, bend our knees, and from here, let's say I wanna stretch out that right one here. All I'm gonna do is cross my left leg over, and then I'm dropping myself down. So what I'm doing is I'm actually gonna stretch this muscle group out. So let me show you from the other side. If I'm stretching my left one up here, crossing the leg, and they both just drop down. What I wanna do is when I'm here, I wanna make sure that my hip doesn't lift up and fall right off. We wanna make sure that it stays as flat as we can to the ground. And just from doing this, you'll start feeling that stretch here. And the more relaxed you are, the more you sit back and basically just lie down and kind of sink into it, the more you're gonna feel that stretch, the more we're gonna get that thing worked out. We need to make sure of one thing though, is that you are doing the foam rolling prior to this. Not doing foam rolling prior to this is kind of leaving out a big chunk of it, so you wanna make sure that you're doing the foam rolling, then coming to this. We're basically trying to break apart that tissue, then stretch it and elongate it out so we can get a nice kind of function and release of that muscle and get ourselves back into that nice posture. Now the second stretch that basically does a similar thing is very closely linked to the last stretch we did. It's a very similar position. The only thing we're doing is we're adjusting that back leg. So I'm gonna have to back out here so you can really see this one. Now what I'm gonna be doing is getting it into that lunge position here. From this position, all I'm doing is taking my leg, my back leg, turning it out. Now I'm lined up straight, so what I would do is, normally if I was doing my quad stretch, my hip flexor stretch, I would just lunge forward into this. Here, we're gonna rotate out. We're gonna take our hand, shoot it across our body. So from the front, I'm going straight, I'm turning my foot back so you can see my foot is behind me here. and then I'm just stretching and reaching back. And at the same time, I'm kind of doing a forward lunge, then a push out. So I'm not just sitting back on it and stretching out, I'm doing a forward slide, then a push out and holding it here, and that should start stretching out that muscle. So basically these two muscle groups that you're gonna be stretching, so the hip flexor group and that TFL group, if you're able to completely stretch those muscle groups out, what you're gonna do is put yourself in a position that is gonna be more favorable for those stabilizing muscles to fire. We're gonna be able to shift the attention from big power muscle groups that shouldn't be doing all that much work to getting the other muscles that are stabilizing everything to control that knee, which is essentially what we want. That knee is a big area where a lot of force passes through, and if it's kind of off and it's not aligned properly, we're losing force, we're losing power, we're losing stability, and we're lining ourselves up for injury. So let's get those things done, and I'll see you guys next week. Oh, don't forget to subscribe. See you guys next week.